This is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. J.L. Verita had a career in business before she gave birth to twin girls who were diagnosed with severe autism. For 22 years, she's been their full-time caretaker and advocate. Finally, she tells her story the way she sees it, the only way a girl from the Bronx can. Raw and honest. The name of her book, Worn Like a Badge.
So I struggled with infertility for a very long time, for 10 years. And then I finally conceived, and the girls were quite difficult to care for from birth, more difficult than they should have been, and that was concerning to me. They stopped reaching milestones at about, I would say, 12 to 14 months, and then the behavior started manifesting themselves. We got a diagnosis, and that's where the story starts.
Was it difficult for you to accept their diagnosis?
It was inconceivable to me that after everything I went through, that this would have happened. It was beyond belief. And I still, to this day, sometimes cannot believe it. I wanted to share my experience with other people. 20 years ago, there was not a lot in terms of support or advocacy. And the diagnosis was very, very serious. The literature on autism at that time was very, very negative and dismal in terms of prognosis. Although my family was around me and supporting me, everyone wanted to, I guess, minimize what was going on and say they'll be fine. And I knew from the very beginning, I knew that they were not going to be fine from the second that I realized. So it was a lot of isolation, and it was a terrible weight that was on me, being the only person that knew that they were not going to be fine. So I wrote the book because I had grief that was palpable. It was all consuming. I felt like I could not possibly be the only person that feels this way. So I wrote the book to tell people about the journey and how difficult it was and how I felt and how, to a certain extent, I continue to feel. The isolation was the most difficult thing for me because I felt that, no one really understood. I felt that I was perceived differently. I felt like my children were automatically perceived differently. And this is a story about resiliency and about hope and about humor and about continue to keep going until you get this done. However done is, I think that this is information that would be helpful to anybody that has difficulty in their life. It's a matter of perseverance and staying strong and hoping and being kind. Although the book is a little abrupt and a little harsh in terms of my language and my feelings on autism and the condition, not my feelings about my daughters, because I always do try to separate the individual from the condition, but I have very strong feelings about autism, and my feelings are shaped on our family's experience.
What do you mean you have very strong feelings in terms of what?
I hate autism. I despise autism. I feel like it is a disease. I call it a disease, and I have unintentionally offended some individuals who are themselves high functioning autistics, who have said, if you're saying that your daughters have a disease, then you're saying I have a disease. And I'm not saying you have a disease. I'm saying my daughters are so profoundly impaired and their lives have been irrevocably changed forever. And I do feel that it is a disease and that it's diminished their life. Clearly, I never intend to offend, but it's how I feel. So that's kind of why I wrote it. I felt like, when you have a very severely affected child, and I have two severely affected children, this is how you feel. It is not part of the modern day narrative on autism because thankfully many children make very good gains, and there's a lot of, in terms of strides in the special needs community, but some kids don't do so well. And those kids struggle and those families struggle. And I felt like they needed a voice.
Well, you've certainly given them a voice that doesn't sugarcoat but speaks the truth. Thank you so much. Dave Rohe was a pilot for 30 years. Now he's a part-time driver for an airport in Florida because he just can't stay away from airplanes. Writing is a new venture for him, inspired by a terrifying experience when he was kidnapped, an experience that affected his life for almost a decade.
I actually was suffering from a mild form of PSD and didn't even know it, okay? Couldn't even talk about it. But my lady who I'm with all the time here, she was very helpful. She gave me some time. She said, you really need to write this because it's been affecting you. I'd get up in the middle of the night, not having nightmares, but not knowing where I am and kind of scared for a few minutes. And then I'd, go back to sleep. So it's been affecting me for a long time. And when I had some therapy for it in China, the therapist asked me what I would like to do when I got out of the trauma. And I told her I'd probably like to write a book so that nobody else would go through this unfortunate incident. And that's been at the back of my mind all these years.
So what happened?
It's kind of an interesting story. I went over there to start a flight school for a Chinese airline. That's how this whole thing got started. And I'm a Canadian citizen and a U.S. resident. So the Canadian Embassy actually was very helpful in China, making connections for me with all these different airlines. And I actually was able to make a lot of headway because of the embassy connections. And when I finally made a connection with one airline and got a contract signed up, the embassy decided, well, this is worth a cocktail party and a reception and a press release. Ta-da! These criminals, 5 of them, decided, son of a gun, guy making no money. Okay. I did know one of the guys because he was just an apparent connection, but I had kind of dismissed him. I didn't know anything about what his background was or anything. So it was him, I guess, following me with the different airlines, I guess. He desperately, I guess, he's Chinese. So he wanted to make a connection with these airlines for himself, which I was not, I was totally unaware of at the time. Pretty disastrous on my, when you're going to do business, you probably need to be a little more security conscious, and I wasn't.
So what did they do to you?
They kidnapped me for 5 days.
How did they do that? Throw a bag over your head in the lobby and drag you out?
Yes, all of the above. Yeah, it was incredibly well organized. They set up a fake dinner, got me into a cab. 2 guys got in the back seat with me, forced a bag over my head, held me down.
Did they hurt you?
No, but they restrained me in many ways, all right? And in fact, 3 years after the event, when the case finally came to court, it was a Chinese court, of course, they kept asking the same question over and over. And I said, why are they asking that question? They said, well, this is an old Chinese tradition. If you kidnap somebody and you let their blood, I guess, they'd get executed and the family pays for the bullets. I didn't even know all this crap. But fortunately, they were able to escape that. They only got 20 years in jail.
So did they keep you in a room or?
Yes, they did. Oh, yes, yeah. They kept me in a very dingy, 2-room, way south of Beijing. If I'd been able to get away, which I'd planned for a couple of days, I never would have known where I was. I mean, it was just in a very low-key area outside of, about 40 miles outside of Beijing.
How did you get out?
Well, it wasn't due to me. It was because the Canadian Embassy, the U.S. Embassy, Interpol, Chinese Secret Police, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they got involved. These stupid guys, actually, we coined a phrase at the end of the book because my friend said, yeah, you were kidnapped by the VID guys. And I said, what do you mean VID? They said, you're a victim of the incredibly dumb. Because they were dumb. They got on the phone to my partner in Canada 5 or 6 times in 3 days with different SIM cards. And the Chinese secret police were all over this right away. So they liaised with Interpol and the Canadian police because they were phoning Vancouver to try and get this $500,000 ransom. So it was a hell of a deal, I tell you. It was quite an event. And finally, when they realized that the ransom was going to be paid, and I wasn't worth $500,000 to anybody, they were talking about killing me on the Saturday. So the Chinese police hatched a plot for a rescue on Friday night, which is what actually happened. Unbelievable.
Were people wondering where the heck you were?
Oh, yes. Yeah, my family. Yeah, that's right. Nobody knew where I was.
And nobody in Hollywood is buying the rights to this story?
Interesting you should say that. I've had 2 requests. One for a screenplay, but they want me to pay. I don't understand how this thing works. I've never written something that attracted this much attention. I don't know how it works. They want me to pay them to write the screenplay.
No.
Yeah, that's what I said. But I haven't got to that point yet, Alice. I'm so excited about having got the book published. You know what I'm saying? My first book. My lady and I are going to be up in Toronto doing a book signing event for my alumni association. I have 2 requests out to Barnes & Noble to do a local book signing. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Plus the Library Association. I've got a teaser out to them to do a presentation because the book signing in Canada is going to include a presentation on China.
Did you ever go back to China?
No, I didn't. Would I? I'm not sure. Because let me tell you something. One of the gentlemen from the Canadian Embassy who was so helpful to me, and he told me, and he was very high profile in China, He said he's not going back because of this big problem between the U.S. and Canada now with the Huawei CEO, who is now under lock and key, I guess, in Canada, and the U.S. wants her extradited. And then China's pretty upset that we're holding her as well. So I don't want to get involved in that stuff. If he doesn't want to go, I'm certainly not going.
Yeah, don't go. Don't go. Look,
No.
things are going so
No.
well now. You've had your therapy, you've written your book. Thank you so
Oh, well,
much.
good.
Tiffany Hayes is raising 4 kids in California between the ages of 8 and 17. She's been writing for as long as she can remember. English, always her favorite subject, and she has a bachelor's in education. She won awards for her essays as a child, and when one of her teachers told her, write a book, she did. It's entitled Splashed in Red.
We have wineries out here, and the story is centered around the wineries in Temecula. There are 3 murders and a few quirky characters. My protagonist is very kind, strong police detective. He also has his own quirks.
Like what?
He's non-conventional. He's Indian descent, and he's this very intelligent homicide detective. However, he enjoys his yoga, his teas, his incense. The lady who's going to host a murder mystery dinner night for Halloween evening, she's a little quirky. She owns this huge mansion over in the wineries. And the ladies who died were connected to her in some way. First one was the party planner, 2 more were connected, and you have to basically dive into their past to find out who it is that had such a huge grudge against these 3 girls to kill them. So first one dies at a country western bar, and the second one dies at another bar and grill, and then the third one dies at her home. However, the 3 of them are party girls, and they're all stabbed, so thus the splashed in red.
What's the point of this book? What do we learn?
Don't be a mean girl. You can end up splashed in red. There's so many different little stories going on in this book. And if you like murder mysteries and you like a good story that catches you with every chapter, because you meet different characters in the book and they each have their own little story. Some of them might have motives to the murder, and some of them you might think, oh, well, they're just inappropriate, but they don't have the motive to murder.
Aha.
At the end, there's the big murder mystery party, and there we go through a murder mystery. It's all fun, cute, fun and games, but then it also is incorporated in the final conclusion to where the real murder of these 3 girls is revealed.
Nice, Tiffany. Move over, Agatha Christie. Thank you. John Coppola is a retired pharmacist and teacher from upstate New York. And while cleaning out his house to sell it in 2014, 2 years after his wife died, he found a manuscript she wrote in 1993. To honor her, he's published Fly Away Free, based on her years as a foster child. You're such a good husband, John.
Well, she was such a good wife. The book is about an older woman living in Florida, and she's walking her dog in Miami Beach, and she comes across 3 young boys who raided an osprey nest, killed the parents, and she rescues one of the young ospreys, and she takes it back to her apartment. And after caring for the bird, being exhausted from her morning walk, she falls asleep, and her dreams take her to her past as a young girl growing up in northern New York during the 1950s. And as a young girl, she learns that she is an adopted child. And being devastated and not being able to understand why her biological parents did not keep her, she grows up with a family who truly loves her. And the story is about her separation from her peers, because she's sort of an outsider. And she discovers Canadian geese eggs, and she takes the eggs home. 2 of the 5 eggs are hatched, and she raises them, and she names them Orville and Wilbur. As an outsider in school, she's sort of shunned by some of her classmates. And through her relationship with her animals, she creates a fantasy world. And in that fantasy world, she finds a neighbor who is a local librarian and a bird expert. With her relationship with her new friend, who's an older woman, the librarian, and her loving parents, she learns to calm her temper, and through a science project at school, she is awarded the science project for documenting the growth and nurturing of her pet geese. In a moment of overwhelming craziness, she invites her classmates to come and visit her pet geese. She's embraced by an applause from her classmates. And through that experience, and through the experience, she learns to accept who she is. Fly Away Free has received 2 prestigious awards. It has been recommended by the U.S. Review of Books, and it was selected as a finalist for the 2018 Book Excellence Award.
Nice, John. Good work. All right, we have to take a quick break, but we're coming right back. This is the Page Publishing Book Club.
Attention all authors. Page Publishing is looking for authors. Have you written a book and want to get it published? Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, Apple iTunes, and other outlets. They handle all aspects of the publishing process for you: printing, cover art, publicity, copyright, and editing. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. That's 800-204-6099 for your free author submission kit.
We're back on the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. William Ahn is an anesthesiologist at a San Bernardino hospital, and a couple of years ago, he found a book by a famous doctor and professor at a prestigious medical school in Korea. He was so inspired by its messages for cancer patients, he decided to translate it into English. The name of the book, Befriending Cancer. William, what's this doctor's name?
The author was Dr. Han, Man Chung Han. He was a radiologist and medical director of Seoul National University Medical Center in Seoul, Korea. This is regarding how we can face the cancer. A lot of people, when they heard that they have cancer, they're very afraid of it, and they just try to go on to the medical treatment with fear. But his message is that you do not have fear. You should not have fear for cancer. You just know about your cancer and then befriend with cancer, and then get a proper treatment, and you may be able to get out of the situation.
He says cancer cells are like a football with an unpredictable bounce.
Right.
So your chances of getting better are just as good as your chances of not getting better.
That is true. Yes. The message is that you have to learn about your cancer and then go through the medical treatment, whatever you decide is the best. Try to find the best doctor available for your treatment.
Does he suggest how you do that? Because sometimes treatments vary widely depending on the doctor.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why you have to study a lot about your doctor as well. The most of all, you should not despair. And nowadays, the cancer is not a threat like we had 20, 30 years ago. It's more like a chronic illness, like hypertension and diabetes. The author had a terminal stage liver cancer. He had about fist-sized big cancer in the liver, and he had to have half of his liver removed. And then 2 months later, on the follow-up checkup, found out that cancer spread in both of his lungs. So he had to go through chemotherapy. And that was a terminal stage of cancer. And he went through the treatment. It's not easy at that time. He had a lot of complications with the treatment. Yet, with the determination, he was able to get through. And he's still living 20 years after. He's a kind of living legend.
That's great. How are you telling people about this book?
When I see a patient for anesthesia service, I just tell them briefly, what this book is about, and let them know about this book available for their cancer treatment.
Good enough, William. Thank you. Darnell Grant is a hotel GM in South Carolina. He wrote and published poetry as a teen, and about 5 years ago, he got the idea for his first book. It's entitled Cursed Plantation, a supernatural twisted tale about a young girl on a plantation during slavery in Louisiana.
It's about a young girl who gets trapped into slavery, coerced into slavery by a sadistic slave owner. Let's say he's taken one liberty too many, and it unleashes a force that is bent on destruction. And the young girl is 16 years old. Giselle is 16. Her father and mother were traders, and they lived in Haiti. She's attacked by a young man intended to rape her. And her mother, who happens to be a voodoo priestess, puts a spell on her that whoever takes her virtue will have to suffer the consequences. And years later, on a trading expedition, she happens to lose her mother. They crash land on the shores of Louisiana and is picked up by a slave owner. Now, Giselle and her father, Henri, have never seen slavery until now. John Weatherford, who happens to be the slave owner, tricks her into staying after he, unbeknownst to Giselle, kills her father. And he rapes her. And that is what lets loose the force that her mother puts in her. And systematically, John's two sons, when they become of age and they have sex for the first time, are brutally killed. John is tormented by certain things happening. And during this process in time, he kills Giselle. And strange things happen to his plantation. There is a part of the ground that is blackened and that nothing ever grows on it. And before Giselle dies, she utters a curse to him and his family, that his family is cursed, his bloodline is cursed, his plantation is cursed.
Where did you come up with this?
The concept has been something in my head. I had to do a little research, yes, of course, into some history and some voodoo, and I had to do that in order to be somewhat accurate. I'm in the process of writing a sequel to it that takes place around 2010.
We find out in the second book just how far this curse goes.
Yes.
Now, you said you have readers.
Yes, I do have a reader, I do have audience. I go through social media. I've gotten my books in a couple of bookstores already, so I'm trying to put hard copies in bookstores. And I do have a book signing set up. Matter of fact, I have one set up in Charleston.
So how do you get this audience? How do they know you?
Through social media, through Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and I put pictures of my cover on the website, and they were interested in that, and I started coming up with scenarios as far as bits and pieces of putting on the book with the picture. For example, for your consideration and pleasure, a haunting, supernaturally twisted tale of privilege, lost innocence, and revenge.
Nice, Darnell. Thank you. Finally, Sarah Miller is a receptionist for South Coast Head Start in Oregon. She's been writing poetry since she was a teenager. First, she started writing about mixed feelings she had about boys, and then how she felt when her stepdad was deployed, and then she just continued right through the rest of her life. It's all in her book entitled Journey Through Time.
The first half of the book is actually from my youth. It's all the poetry I wrote as a young adult. And then the second half is all poetry that I wrote as an adult. And I finished 3 more books, and I'm working on a 4th, but they are not poetry. They are murder mysteries.
So you got the bug. You got the writing bug.
Oh, yeah, I love to write.
Do you love to read your poetry?
I do.
Do you read it to other people?
I have, yes. It was a secret of mine for the longest time. People knew I wrote, but I didn't like to share it until I was finished. I just had that feeling that I wasn't ready to share it until I felt it was the book was complete. So I have read a few out loud to one of the preschool classes, but I had to pick and choose what I read because reading to 4 and 5-year-olds some of my stuff was not incredibly appropriate. But I do have a poem called Pop Pop, which is all about popcorn, and they loved it. My poetry can go from young adolescent girls to any adult experiencing angst, depression, happiness, sadness. They're really life experiences. I gave one of my books to a dear friend, and she has read it over and over again, and she said she could not believe how much she related to some of the things that I wrote, and she believed it brought her closer to me, which kind of gave me a little tickle. But
Aw, a little tickle. I love that.
yeah,
Poetry's a rough sell out there in bookland.
it is. It is. I've been experiencing that, and to be honest with you, publishing this book was just a self actualization. It's something that I wanted to do. It was an accomplishment for myself, and I figured if it sold, it sold. If it didn't, it didn't.
Open mic nights anywhere there in Oregon?
My little corner of the world, no, not so much. I live in a very small town, and I do love it. Coos Bay, well, it's actually the Coos Bay North Bend area. Our cities intertwine. Most of the open night mic stuff that we have is related to music, which is also something that's near and dear to me. So when we do those kinds of things, it's rather singing than poetry. But I do have a few of my poems I wouldn't mind turning into song.
All right, Sarah, very good. Thank you. And thanks to all of the authors who joined us for this edition of the Page Publishing Book Club. If you missed anything, just go to 710WOR.com and download the podcast. Talk to you soon. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini.